Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, July 11th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, reminding you that it is time for you to go to commentary.org/roast if you want to learn about, find out about, and join us on October 19th here in New York City for our 16th annual or 15th annual. I'm never going to do the count because I think it's too funny that I don't know what the count is, even though I invented the roast. We've done one every year except COVID year since 2010. So somebody out there do the math and you can figure it out whether it's 15 or 16. Anyway, we're having our roast. It's our annual fundraiser in New York. It is a very unusual fundraiser as it is entirely comic in spirit. We take a prominent person and we don't roast them like a Friars Club roast. We roast them more gently, but we tease them, we make fun of them, and we celebrate them, and we celebrate the year that we have all had together. We talk about commentary in this future. There's comic hijinks. Sometimes there's a musical act, and there's a cocktail hour, and then it goes 2 hours, and then you're home to watch Bachelor in Paradise or go back to your hotel room and do whatever it is that people do in their hotel rooms. Great event. 500 people usually show up. The commentary community comes out in force. Commentary.org/roast. Our roastee this year is Clifford Asness, the hedge fund manager and general economic guru. If you want to know how Cliff thinks about things, he and Michael Strain wrote a really wonderful piece for the Free Press earlier this week about Americans misunderstanding the nature and the strength of the U.S. economy. Give you a sense of what a sensible and forthright person Cliff is, and why he'll be fun to make fun of. So commentary.org/roast. Take a look, and we'll be talking about this more as the months progress and we get closer and closer to the date. And by we, I mean executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John. I think we should outsource the math to Cliff from now on because he's very...
Yeah, well, I don't. It's so elementary that maybe he would make the same kind of mistake. He's like somebody who could probably calculate things to a billionth of a penny, but counting years, I don't know. Maybe that's, that's too simple. All right, we've just been talking, and we're only going to do like 3 minutes on this. I swear to God. But there is a piece that is roughly the length of Remembrance of Things Past in the New York Times, asserting in the headline and through the piece that Bibi Netanyahu prolonged the war in Gaza for his own domestic political needs, which is a slander unless you can prove it definitively. Saying that somebody wanted his country to continue in war, risk the lives of Israelis facing missile strikes and attacks and going into the reserves in the hundreds of thousands and all of that without absolute proof is nothing less than a libel. Though I haven't finished Remembrance of Things Past, nor have I finished this, though I've had many more years to read Remembrance of Things Past. I have read, I think, 3 of the 7 novels in Remembrance of Things Past. So I haven't finished this, but I did read some of it and then glance through the rest of it, and it does not prove its case. And this is very important because, of course, this piece is coming out at a time of great desperation for the Israeli left and for the American anti-Israel kind of cult consensus from the center to the far left, which is that Bibi Netanyahu has found himself after very many months in an incredibly strong political position after the Iran strikes and because of the love fest this week and the continuing love fest with Donald Trump. And so any effort that can be made to tear him down, to cut his knees off, to make him look as though he is a despicable, monstrous person who would sacrifice Israeli lives for his own narrow political benefit, is an extreme charge. And just very briefly, Bibi Netanyahu, there was an election in 2022. Bibi Netanyahu's coalition got 64 seats. I think the coalition is now up to 68 seats, or some effectively up to 68 seats. You need 60. There had not been There had not been a majority government in Israel for 5 years until this election. He won an outright majority with his coalition. And that election comes with a 4-year term, meaning unless the government falls, because it's a parliamentary system, parties pull out, he has a 4-year term as prime minister, as Israeli law dictates. This piece seems to argue that because of everything that was terrible that he's done, he should effectively commit political suicide and take his own government down for the good and the benefit of the Israeli people. No elected politician in the world does such a thing, and we've actually seen in our own current domestic political falderall what happens when a politician sacrifices himself because he can't take it anymore. And that's Andrew Cuomo, who resigned from the governorship of New York State amid accusations of sexual handsiness, let's say, and not from accusations that probably should have taken him down, which were his fascistic behavior as governor and the mishandling of people in nursing homes. And how did that work out for Andrew Cuomo? Right? Not only did he lose his governorship, which he did not have to, he could have remained governor. Nothing was going to happen to him. But of course, then he ran using the money in his pocket. He ran from his campaign finance chest. He ran for mayor and was ritually humiliated. So generally speaking, politicians don't commit suicide. Unless
one thing though, John, technically,
yes,
ultimately his COVID behavior did bring him down because he really could have used those voters in the primary.
That is a really good sick joke. I'm going to say it's a sick joke and it's a good joke. Yes, because he needed older voters to vote against the Mamdani coalition. Anyway, the point is, when politicians fail, they fail because their coalitions collapse. Or Howard Baker comes to Richard Nixon in 1974 and says, "You're going to get impeached. So you have two choices. You either resign or you're going to get impeached." And that was his own party. That was a senator from his own party who was saying, "I can no longer protect you from removal by the Senate if you are impeached by the House," which he was about to be. So expecting that because liberals in Israel don't like Bibi Netanyahu, that he would somehow just fold up and die, as opposed to fight on, given his absolute iron conviction that he was his own personal belief that he is the only person who can conduct this war and win it, and is showing many signs that determination is probably likely true, since not the originating part of the Seven Front War in Gaza is over yet, but the wars elsewhere, right, with Iran and Hezbollah, and I guess Syria as a proxy for Iran are way over and have been won by Israel.
But isn't this really more less a reflection of what's going on in Israeli domestic politics and more a reflection of what's going on in internal New York Times politics? Where, I mean, these sorts of stories have become so commonplace that we forget to even note them. But, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But to a New York Times reporter with a half-baked narrative structure in mind, everything becomes this ideological storytelling. And you can see them trying to slot in by, they talk to the only certain people who will endorse the narrative and never print the stuff that won't endorse the narrative. And I feel like right now, as you say, John, because Netanyahu is coming off of this very successful visit with the Trump administration and the successful attacks on Iran, the New York Times felt like the alarm went off, time to take him down a peg. And so they just plug in these stories. They do it with cultural issues all the time, but it is more glaringly obvious what they're doing when I think we have documented foreign policy and political aims that can be seen from other perspectives.
I love the whole idea that Bibi's the one who prolonged this war in the first place. Who prolonged the war? Well,
Joe Biden.
Saying
Kamala Harris.
Don't go into Rafah. Slow walking the arms that were promised to Israel. So Israel literally had to stop because they didn't have what they needed. Calling for these ridiculous ceasefire plans that were never going to happen at the time with Hamas. And who else prolonged the war? Israel's enemies. I mean,
By
it takes
continuing to
time
fight.
to fight a war when you don't want to kill the people that were stolen from your country and are underground in the urban settings that you're fighting it in.
Right.
Seth,
I mean, that's the thing. Like Hamas is its own sort of separate thing here because they have the hostages as human shields. But every enemy that attacked Israel during this war, that Israel had the freedom to fight normally, Israel vanquished stunningly quickly. When it decided to take the hammer to Hezbollah, it had those plots in place, and the walkie-talkies and the beepers and all the rest, and it basically just flipped a switch. And when Iran was making too much trouble, again, Israel sort of just flipped a switch. So that it all comes down to the fact that Hamas is using human shields and Bibi is trying desperately not to get those hostages killed.
Okay, so the other thing is the reason that I bring up Israeli domestic politics has to do with one of the bylines on the story. So I think there are 3 bylines on the story, and one of them is Ronen Bergman. And Ronen Bergman is a very important figure in Israeli and American intelligence journalism, particularly in relation to Israel. He is probably Israel's foremost reporter. He is kind of like the combination of Woodward, Bernstein, Seymour Hersh, and I don't even know who else. A deeply sourced person within the Israeli deep state. And by the deep state here, I mean something descriptive, not critical, meaning within the intelligence apparatus of Israel, which has 3 or 4 different layers, and the military. And so his reporting is often very authoritative and very powerful. And he is a person of the Israeli center left. Even though his material is about sort of the heroics, largely dedicated to the heroics of Israel's intelligence community, the Israel intelligence community historically is itself a kind of classic, wouldn't say leftist, but how would you describe sort of establishmentarian grouping in the country that doesn't like all of the more hardline elements of Israel's political coalition on the right and is disgusted by it. And a lot of people in the Israeli intelligence community don't recruit from, or they're not really part of the social world of the Bibi voter, and they don't like the Bibi voter. So when Bergman writes a piece like this or contributes to a piece like this, he is sourcing material from people who are ideologically discongruent with the sitting government and who have an agenda against it. And so you can read this piece as the statement of the non-radical Israeli liberal consensus, which is which is way smaller than people in the United States understand, since that's all the people that a lot of American Jews and people who go to conferences with Israelis come into contact with. But it's not negligible. It's several 100,000 people who can go out in the streets and protest the government at a drop of a hat if they have to. And so I read this as this effort to create a definitive statement of the argument that Bibi should be ousted from power because he has placed Israelis at undue risk for his own personal political benefit. And as I say, I think that's a slander unless it is definitively proven, and it is therefore journalistically outrageous, and it is for Bergman himself a shame and a shock and a disappointment that this is where he would go with his power as a journalist. But here we are. So, all right, let's move on to the Democratic Party and the flavor of the moment, of course, Zohran Mamdani. As the mainstream Democratic Party grapples with how to handle the fact that a person who describes himself as a democratic socialist says he hates capitalism, doesn't like cops, wants to defund the police, wants to have homeless living in subway stations, has announced that he will not allow his NYPD, if he becomes mayor, to do things like go on calls for domestic violence accusations. but rather will send a social worker to the door where a man has a knife at his wife's throat, that kind of thing. Many other, I'm not going to go through the Zoran Mamdani greatest hits. You can do that at any time. But Democrat Party is trying to figure out how to cope. And there are two models of coping, right? One model of coping is just give in and say, okay, well, he duly elected and we're all Democrats, and maybe he's got some very passionate ideas, but here we are, and he has young people enthusiasm, and it's a new coalition and all of that. And the other would be to treat him like David Duke in 1990, when the Klan, when the head of former or current head of the Klan won the Republican nomination for governor of Louisiana, and the president of the United States, who was a Republican, and every leading Republican said, vote for the Democrat, because the Klansman should not become governor of Louisiana, which is exactly what happened. So clearly, option two, not happening.
Well, I'll push back a little bit on that as the only option, because I think one of the challenges with someone like Mamdani, not just generationally and the kind of voter who finds him appealing, is that they actually don't know who David Duke is. And they don't remember a time when the parties were self-policing in that way. And I think it makes it difficult for them to understand his extremism, which is why the coverage that the Democratic apparatus is giving him is more terrible in a way. I mean, so this episode yesterday where PBS NewsHour had on DNC chair Ken Martin and asked him very straightforward question: do you support globalize the intifada, which is what Mamdani had said it's still a phrase he supports, he did not disavow. And the kind of crazy over-the-top mumbling that Ken Martin did before saying, well, we're a big tent. The fact that they're a big tent now includes that sort of phrasing. I worry that the younger voter doesn't understand the, I think, correct moral equation you're posing, John. And that's in part because there's a problem on the right as well with anti-Semitism. So the horseshoe theory has kind of disrupted that clarity. But the fact that Ken Martin can't even say, that's questionable language, and we don't really, that's the kind of thing that we shouldn't be encouraging in our candidates. He doesn't even have to disavow him entirely. But I think there's a lot of confusion on the Democratic Party's part about how to deal with this new force. And it is a force, and it is, it's the acceleration of squad politics, but it's coming for the party. I mean, they need these voters.
It's not just the voters. They need the voters. And they also, if you're Ken Martin, who is not having a good term as the chairman of the DNC, fundraising is way down, had this whole controversy with his deputy chair saying we're going to primary old people to get new people in. Literally, the person in high reaches of the party threatening incumbents just for their age, and then having to step down. A lot of disgruntlement about Ken Martin, and of course the phenomenon that is following Democrats following along with Trump, or the success that Trump has had. That young radicals in the party basically saying, fall in line with what we want, or we will organize with our grassroots power, protest candidates against you in primaries next year who will oust you and beat you and take you out and do what we want. And so you better do what we want, or you will be Jeff Flake or Bob Corker or Adam Kinzinger or whatever, Liz Cheney. And then, so if you want to stay in power, kowtow to us. And because we have seen success with that strategy, not in the Democratic Party exactly, but we've seen really massive success at sort of institutional control from a more radical element of the party. Politicians are scared. They're scared, and they don't want to say what they might want to say about Mamdani because there's no institutional structure to protect them. In 1991, if the president of the United States says, don't vote for David Duke, now, Pat Buchanan primaried George H.W. Bush. You may think Pat Buchanan primaried George H.W. Bush because of the economic problems of 1991. But if you think that Pat Buchanan was happy that Bush went against David Duke, you got another think coming. And that was a very early example of how a sotto voce, really quiet, not really present, hard to organize pre-internet group of people got very disaffected with the sitting president of the United States because he seemed to be fighting a war to support Israel by going after Saddam Hussein in Kuwait, which a line on the right was that this was a war for Israel, which was so psychotic that I can't even get there, but it shows you that anti-Semitism on the right was still very potent, and that he opposed this, populist candidacy that just because the guy was in the Klan, really? I mean, how come liberals can have been in the SDS and then they get to be candidates? So, but there was an institutional wall against punishing anybody from consequences of saying, okay, I'm not going to support this Republican, or I'm going to actually affirmatively recommend that you vote against the Republican and for the Democrat to save the American Republic from a major job in American politics going to a member of the Ku Klux Klan or a leader of the Ku Klux Klan. There's no institutional framework to defend anyone.
There's also, there's the institutional framework to defend Mamdani. And it's not just political. It's the media landscape is so different. They don't treat people who say globalize the Intifada as they would people in the Klan. It's an entirely different understanding. There's a total embrace. I'm talking really. I mean, we're focusing on the party and on the political aspects, but the media here too is just so fully supportive that to get behind any criticism of him, you're going to bring yourself in for a world of pain from all sorts of establishment figures.
Right. I mean, that's one of the power checks, is that the media is not, when it was Trump, everybody was asked about every tweet, and I'm not even criticizing that necessarily. Just saying there's an inconstancy. But I will say also that one of the things that bothers me is one of the things that's been difficult about dealing with the Republican Party in the era of Trump has also been a source of some kind of optimism, which is that Trump is a unique figure who can't be replicated. And every time somebody tries to replicate it, they lose an election, right? I mean, the crazies that he helps nominate in Pennsylvania and elsewhere lose swing seats, even while he then goes on to beat Joe Biden in Pennsylvania. I mean, he is capable of being Trump and no one else is. And I don't know. I know that obviously the Pat Buchanan-ish segment of the right that was there is still there, and obviously can run these sorts of challenges. It doesn't make everything go away, but Trump is a massive engine, a massive driver of what people do when and why in the Republican Party. And what concerns me with we're seeing with the Mamdani stuff is that it isn't one person. It is a genuine wave of young, talented, in many cases, politicians. And there are no real guardrails, but also you can't wait it out. There's a certain sense that if you can sort of wait Trump out, and the things that he's done will live on, but he himself won't be replicated. And what's happening with the Democrats is better versions of their extremists and more politically savvy versions of their extremists are coming up in each wave.
That is a very original observation, which is to say that people who tried to be Trump after Trump stank, right? A lot of them were really bad. Herschel Walker, all the people who lost in Trump's wake, except for a couple, right? There's sort of J.D. Vance, won in Ohio. He was in third or fourth place when he got into the senatorial race in the Republican primary. Trump liked him, put his hands on him. Vance turned out to be a fleet and clever politician. We have many problems with him, but there he is, and now he's the vice president of the United States with so many failures, so many people who didn't have Trump's magic. And having AOC's magic turns out to be not all that necessarily difficult, because Trump's magic is a combination of being a kind of crazy old guy who likes, wrestling and McDonald's and is world famous and, an insult comedian. And that appeals to a cohort inside the inside the right that was not properly served over many years, let's say, since everybody tried to kind of stuff that part of the right and say, no, we're wonderful. Look how nice we are. Women, we have binders full of women, all of that stuff. Mamdani is an example of a version of this on the left, which is to say, that game isn't going to play. Like a hard Antifa person who starts shooting at ICE agents who are busting a pot farm in California, he's not going to be the candidate who wins. But a soft-spoken, attractive, handsome, suited, very articulate guy who looks more with it than the people he's running against in a primary, can say very extreme things over the course of 6 or 7 years in his political life, and you can pluck them out and show them. But he is a better face than sort of the people that he's representing, or a more attractive face.
But this is where, he's the dirtbag left in a suit is what he is, because this is actually where the gerontocracy of the Democratic Party is coming back to haunt them, because that covered up for many years. Remember the Bernie Bros? Remember, this has been going on for the dirtbag left has been simmering for a long time. It's very unappealing. Hassan Piker is the current sort of exemplar of this, but he comes from that part of the left, and he calls himself a socialist, but their message is a weird mirror image of some of the worst elements of the right, in the sense that it's very negative. It's very much like, we've got to tear down these people who are no billionaires, no overseas jobs. You can see it's not a perfect example. They're not perfect mirrors of each other, but the tone is very similar. And that's where I think long term, I have a mild bit of optimism that these candidacies are not going to see the success that we worry they might have, because the nice normie middle doesn't like the negativity. Those sorts of politicians are the expressions of our worst feelings. And we do still tend to like some politicians to give us a reason for hopefulness. And that's where, but I really think we need to spend some time reminding ourselves of what the dirtbag left was, is, and continues to be, because the mainstream media has long ignored that part of the coalition.
Okay, so Axios published a piece on July 7th by Andrew Solander. The headline is "Democrats Told to, quote, get shot," unquote, for the anti-Trump resistance. At town halls in their districts and in one-on-one meetings with constituents and activists, Democratic members of Congress are facing a new thrum of demands to break the rules, fight dirty, and not be afraid to get hurt. Democrats told Axios they see a growing anger among their base. And we have people who are desperately wanting us to do something. No matter what we say, they want more. Representative Brad Schneider of Illinois told Axios, he's the chair of the center-left New Democratic Coalition. And some of them have suggested what we really need to do is be willing to get shot when visiting ICE facilities or federal agencies, a third House Democrat told Axios. Our own base is telling us that what we're doing is not good enough, that there needs to be blood to grab the attention of the press and the public. So what these people are hearing as they go out and say, tell me what you want, I'm your representative, let's talk about what's on your agenda, is go get yourself shot at an ICE protest. Wave your bloody
martyr,
shirt.
Basically. Martyr yourself for our cause.
Get a bloody shirt and wave it. Otherwise, we have no use for you. Now, this is real. Like, this isn't, this is a real thing. You can feel it. it's our friend, colleague, and contributor Noah Rothman's point, which is that since 2015, people keep talking about how, it's the Trump left and the Trump right and the sort of the people who stormed the Capitol and all that, who are looking for, to create violent riots and things like that. The violent riots are on the left, not on the right. And they happen time and again. And yesterday, indeed, somebody was shooting at ICE agents who went to an illegal marijuana farm where there were 8 and 9-year-old children picking marijuana leaves in 100-degree heat.
Children who were there undocumented without parent. They were had been brought across the border to work in an illegal pot farm.
Yeah. Okay. So, if that's what the Democratic Party has to deal with, is people who think that is merited, justified, and that any effort to either stop that or deport that or do whatever, what you want to do is draw their fire, literally draw their fire. That's a pretty interesting place that Democrats have gotten to, or that Democratic politicians are having to deal with. And I want to, go ahead.
I think it also has to do with wanting to catch up to Trump on the left.
Yeah.
What's that?
Trump envy.
Yeah. It's like, how did this guy change the game? How was he able to go outside of the yard lines that we understood were the legit ones, and yeah, he got called out, he got criticized, he got this, but he kept winning. And how did he do that? And by the way, he got shot, and it was a completely triumphant moment. He didn't plan to get shot, but it's this how do we become a spectacle that works in the same way?
So, our friend Mark Halperin's Wide World of News released a polling deck from respected Republican pollster Bill McInturff, a serious guy, not a hack, on the yesterday of advantages Republicans have and advantages that Democrats have in polling. And the Republican advantages are pretty striking. I'm just going to read off a couple to you. So in 2025, merging data from NBC and CNBC, the party identification of registered voters is now 43% Republican and 41% Democrat. In 2012, that number was 46% Democrat and 37% Republican. So there's been an 11-point shift over the last 13 years. And the progression has been steady and constant. So in 2016, Democrats +7. In 2020, Democrats +6. In 2023, Democrats +2. In 2024, Republicans +1. And now Republicans +2. So that is a 13-year trend showing an increasing identification with the Republican Party on the part of American voters. Here is the other thing that is pretty staggering. Change is what you want to represent in American politics when people say that the country is on the wrong track, right? You want to be bringing change or say you're going to change things. So Trump and change. Is Trump bringing change or not bringing change? Right kind of change and wrong kind of change. America's handling of border security and immigration. 81% said Trump is bringing change. 56% say it's the right kind of change. 25% say it's the wrong kind of change. Net difference of 31%. Federal spending and the size of the federal government. Trump is bringing change, 76%. Right kind of change? 47% say right kind of change on federal spending. Wrong kind of change? 29%. Republican advantage of 18%, or Trump 18%. America's handling of the war between Israel and Hamas and Gaza. Now we're hearing all this stuff about how opinions of Israel are changing for the worse. 62% say bring change. 42% right kind of change. 20% wrong kind of change. I wish that number was higher, but it's still plus 22% that our America's handling of the war between Israel and Hamas and Gaza on Trump's part is overwhelmingly positive compared to otherwise. America's handling of the war between Russia and Ukraine, 75% change. Trade and tariffs. The one place in which Trump is not doing great is trade and tariffs. He's only got a net positive difference of 3%. Okay. 41% say right kind of change, 38% say wrong kind of change. And then America's relationship with Europe and its allies and NATO also a 3% positive, 40 to 37. But in major areas, border security, federal spending, and the war that has occupied the world's attention for 20 months, Trump has an overwhelming net advantage on the idea that he is bringing the right kind of change. That's pretty staggering. Now, just to move on to the Democratic advantages, 48% of people say that the economy is getting worse. 28% say it's getting better. That number has gotten worse for Trump, actually, over time, because excuse me, I got this backward. I'm sorry. In June 2025, it was 53 to 39, wrong direction, right track. That's minus 14. He started with minus 31. So things are getting better for him, but he's still on the downslope on that. Trump is now considered responsible for higher prices, 41 to 29. And 55 of the 71% of Americans who say they were aware of the One Big Beautiful Act, 55% opposed, 29% support. So, but as McInturf says, you want to be on the side of change. Trump has changed. Trump remains change.
But that's why I think we're seeing on every issue where the majority of Americans are somewhere moderately in the center of it. Think of transgender stuff. Think of border security. Think of all these, especially the cultural issues, but also these important issues. That's when, instead of trying to get back towards the center, the Democratic Party's big stars right now are speaking in more violent language, becoming more radicalized on issues. This is true of the environmental issue as well. It's the planet's going to burn. We're all going to die. It's not, let's go back to the Obama era policy where we said, let's try to do some new things with our energy policy, but also, we have to support the existing state of things. That used to be the Democratic Party. And now it's no more combustion engine, only solar panels, and the government should subsidize it. On student loan debt forgiveness, or debt transfer, as I prefer to call it. Same thing. Most people are like, this doesn't seem fair. The Democratic Party radicalizes. And on economic policy, I think that's where we see Mamdani representing a more radical, outspoken, he calls it socialism. It's a little questionable whether it's actual socialism, but they radicalize on the things that they're actually losing the American public on. And that's notable. They didn't used to do that.
Right. Well, it is a very, very big, it's a very big deal that this is a long historical trend. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan won the presidency and wholesale shifted American politics in a way that was as transformative in its own way over time as the New Deal coalition, there were twice as many Democrats as Republicans. 42% of Americans said they were Democratic, 22% said they were Republican, and yet Reagan got 50% of the vote, which indicated that the tribe that you were part of was the Democratic Party tribe, if you were, all things being equal, but you didn't vote Democratic. All kinds of people didn't vote Democratic. When it push came to shove, they ended up voting Republican for the Senate and for Reagan twice. Reagan then won, of course, 58% in 49 states in the next election. Bush got 53% and won 41 states. I mean, it was like, this was a real thing. And so, but Democrats were the default party in the United States pretty much through 2012, as I cited that, a partisan identification number. And it's all broken down. It's all broken down, I think, because of what you say, which is, what are Democrats promising people? I mean, you can say, as Tyler Cowen says in a brilliant essay in the Free Press, that what Mamdani, the reason people like Mamdani and like socialism is that it promises free stuff, and who doesn't like free stuff? And that's a real thing. So at least you say, government grocery store, I'll give you don't have to pay for the bus, whatever, I'll give you free stuff. But what are they what is progressivism's utopian future? There is none. Trump promises everything. We're going to be the biggest economy in the world. All of our enemies are going to bow down before us. We're going to see glories the likes of which we've never seen. Right? I mean, that is kind of like this weird pie in the sky, Reverend Ike. You can eat your pie. You can get to heaven and eat your pie on earth too. Like, this is, I'll give you everything you want if you just vote for me. And Democrats the earth is melting. There's structural racism that means that we will never be a just society. All we can do is mitigate the damage that 4 centuries of American evil and 10 centuries of Western monstrosity have done. What are they promising people? I don't know.
To save them from Trump, which the people don't really want to be saved from.
Well, not enough of them. Yeah.
Right,
I mean, by the way, it's a potent message for 40% of Americans who really do fear and hate Trump. And I think that's a floor. Like, it will never go below that.
The people that the Democrats are putting forward and promising to save others from Trump are the exact sort of technocratic elite that most of the country has also grown suspicious of, mistrustful of, in many cases for very good reason, in terms of the elite, the sort of educational and political elites handling of major crises in the last 10 to 20 years.
There's no question about that. I think that the anger at establishment, mishandling crises, and things like that is real. I also think that Democrats have created a situation in which they're just going to keep saying that for 1,000 years. Like, that's part of what's going to limit them, which is how many years after the 2008 financial crash can you tell young people to be angry about the 2008 crash, right? How many years after? I mean, the right had something similar with Iraq, right? Like, how many, the right's infighting over how many years can you invoke the word Iraq and change policy in an instant, right? Trump seems to have crossed, we seem to have crossed to the other line of that. That seems to have expired, where Trump is from the part of the GOP that used to yell Iraq at people to stop policy, and now he's the one saying, whatever. It was like, there is an expiration date to some of the things on both sides, but Democrats are really putting all their cards in a kind of misery that and the mishandling of specific crises. But the country has not gone, to hell in a handbasket since then, right? Like, in other words, 2008 wasn't the beginning of the world being engulfed in flames. It was bad, and people who mishandled it will pay the political price, because that's how small d democratic politics works. But it wasn't like, it didn't reveal that America was the emperor with no clothes. It didn't reveal that the whole American project was somehow empty and insincere. We weather certain things and move on. And I think that Democrats are playing a dangerous game with their own voters in trying to extend the expiration date of specific crises, precisely because America is not constantly in crisis.
However, I will say real commentary math has never been tried. So I think we need to stick with that principle just for this podcast.
Yes. Okay. So we just had the 4th of July, sort of reminded of great American oratory, even though there's only really one genuinely great 4th of July speech, which was Calvin Coolidge's sesquicentennial speech, as opposed to what's coming up next year, which is I'm challenging you again. Semi-quincentennial. Thank you. Okay. There's really only one really great 4th of July speech. But of course, you think about the rhetoric of the Lincoln's second inaugural and the Gettysburg Address. And then there is, of course, the greatest speech of the 20th century, probably, which is Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And what is the key message of that speech? The Declaration of Independence is a promissory note, meaning American traditions themselves provide the means, the structure, and the way to make the country a better and freer and more moral and more just place, simply by fulfilling the terms of the promissory note. We all have promises. It's loans, right? We pay our loans, and that's a promissory note that we make when we borrow money. Okay, so America's a promissory note. So at the end of the promissory note is a better America. What is the message of the last 15 years? America was born in evil and sin in 1619, has not gotten much better, and that everything that is done to heal the damage is a form of reparations. It is not a permanent change that will make the country better. It is, we accept the logic that everything is unjust. So give us our peace, like just pay us off, give us all things, and maybe we'll leave you alone or something like that. I don't know where you go with that message, and particularly if Trump leaves the scene and some of the structural changes here remain enduring, if they don't have what Abe says, right? If they don't have Trump, I mean, they can say J.D. Vance, they can try to invent a new Trump. There's always a Republican villain. Romney somehow became a villain who strapped his dog to the roof of a car and, gave people cancer or something like that. Whatever. You could sort of invent villainy, but it's not going to have the same potency because Trump is a, colossally strange political figure that did everything in a completely different way. And trying to claim that somebody is just a new version of Trump isn't going to have the same effect. And Democrats are going to have to be themselves in that circumstance and say, okay, here's what we have for you for the future for 20 years. What is the country going to be like if you hand us off power? What?
Well, and that shows another massive. I was just thinking when you were talking about different speeches, the Kennedy JFK asked not what you can do, what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. That used to be a kind of broadly liberal, democratic coded message, and there is a sense among the progressive left rhetoric that it is all about what the country, or particularly the federal government or the government in general, owes you. You can go to college, get a degree that has no practical value, and the government should pay for that because you're an American. And there's a weird sort of sense of a lack of purpose and meaning. And the thing about the promissory note aspect of the Declaration of Independence is that it was assumed that the obligation was on the citizens' part to take action, to fulfill those promises, to actually embrace them and say, now I do something with them. And that was certainly the early history of the country and of its expansion westward and all that. We don't have that kind of sensibility anymore when we talk about what's owed us. What do I deserve? Not what was promised that I will take advantage of and use my amazing freedom as a citizen to accomplish. And again, pursuit of happiness, not actually the end being happiness. You were never promised happiness. And there's a whole argument going on culturally about whether with the youth mental health epidemic and all the stuff going on with people's general sense of anger and anxiety, that's now more coded left as well. Because if you start looking at the surveys that look at happiness and whatnot, it is not the left that's happy. They are not happy. And that speaks to why perhaps many of their popular candidates are encouraging that feeling and that sense of, what do people owe you? How have you been ripped off? It's not good for the civic health of the nation, but it's obviously useful for practical political purposes.
I even more jarring about your analysis here is America not only says, you sort of pursue happiness, but that part of the Democratic or the leftist promise is that you can get that with a vote. In other words, that your political allegiance, vote for Zoran Mamdani, and you will get the things that you need, as opposed to you're voting to have somebody who manages the country's collective affairs, or cities, collective states, whatever. You're voting for people to manage the government, and maybe you want the government to manage more things and have more regulation, or maybe you want less. But your vote is not change. The politicians affect change. The promise here, and Trump is as guilty of this as anybody, is vote for me, and that actually goes a long way to getting you what you want. Whereas, as you're saying, like, the whole point here is we have a country that provides people with personal freedom. Then they're supposed to act on what their personal freedom might provide them. And if you start substituting a thing you do once a year, or maybe twice a year, depending on local elections, you do once a year or once every 4 years, and then that's your contribution to self-government. Self-government is what you do with yourself every hour of every day, right? Voting is just about picking the people who then administer the money and the laws that help keep the society in order. And there's a complete confusion of this now, and it's very much part of the progressive agenda to follow Trump and say, give us the power and we'll make everything happen for you, which is, of course, disempowering. It's, it's castrating. I don't know. It's all kinds of things. Like David French has this big piece about how he in the New York Times, about how he had this long conversation with Jordan Peterson about the male crisis, and that David effectively says the problem here isn't, that men have been squashed by women, and that's sort of what Jordan Peterson says. It's that they don't have purpose and meaning, in their own lives, and it's a sort of very interesting kind of conversation. So Peterson's trying to find something to blame, and David say, we can't blame, these ideas. It's a problem, in the American soul or something like that. And the issue is that they're both wrong. The problem is that people feel like their life, their future, their history, is not their own, that they are sort of automata following a cultural script. You're white privileged, you're black, you're an eternal victim, whatever. And the whole idea is there is no script. Maybe that's an American delusion, that there's no script, and that there is a script, but we pretend that there isn't, which is, I think, sort of the Howard Zinn idea. But the fact is, if you act as if there is no script, then you have total freedom of motion. And if you act as though you're just sort of like a piece on a chessboard, and you're being moved by forces larger than yourself, then you're disempowered. Then you're going to sit in your basement and play video games and take fentanyl.
It's a really complicated. I mean, I think, John, what you said is such a deep point. I'm just trying to think about why people feel more that way now than they used to, and I think it has to do with them being less engaged with their real lives. When you see sort of powerful people playing out these things on the world stage constantly, when everyone is in touch with sort of what's happening with the world's richest, most famous, and most powerful people constantly now. I mean, by virtue of media and the internet and their phones. And there's sort of no time to retreat back to your life, where you actually do have agency and control and self-governance. It's you feel as if you're just watching this 24-hour global show that you can do, that you have no connection to other than as a spectator and a complainer occasionally and a taxpayer. You're not in it, but it's in your face constantly. but you can't really touch it.
Well,
Can I add to that this what reminds me of Daniel Boorstin, who wrote a lot about the image in American myth and all that stuff, culture. But one of the things that Boorstin used to say is that the American history is the reading of biographies. That Americans, to learn their own history and to learn history, read biographies. There was something about the American story that was person driven, and the American feeling, this was what he argued, was that you could be the guy who did it, right? You could be Harry S. Truman, who didn't finish college and ran a haberdashery, whatever, and then because of your ties to political machine, you got plucked into the Senate, and because of that, you ended up becoming president and ended up becoming a world historically great figure because of the rising to the moment, whatever. But Borston's idea was Americans see their history through biography, and that was a very empowering idea because there's not just some force of history that you're riding along on like a river, like a lazy river. History is made by Americans, and Americans used to really truly believe that, not just politicians who said, John McCain used to say things like this, but not just politicians. He was right. This was an American feeling that about what the individual could accomplish.
There was also, and at the same time, there was a strain that was healthy in another sense that has also disappeared, I think in part because of what Abe is describing in terms of the politicization of everything and it being in your face all the time. And that's the right to be left alone. That image of the broken up snake, which became out of many one, a rallying cry for multiple wars and eventually the revolution, spoke to something, which is that the snake would come together, achieve something, and then people could go back to their lives, their practical daily lives, which did give them meaning and purpose and embedded them in communities. And that was also an American value. So you could become Harry S. Truman, but you could also just stay on your farm and do your thing and not have to participate in the politicization of everything. And that has changed. It's very difficult to avoid having those conversations, even in your own local neighborhood on a daily basis.
Even if the biographical America that you talk about was partially, mythic. Not everybody can grow up to be Abraham Lincoln, who was a world historical genius, but Abe Lincoln in another country could never have been Abe Lincoln. There would have been no Abe. There was no Abe Lincoln in Britain or France. You couldn't imagine an obscure kid, born.
You would never have sat
Kentucky
for the exams that those countries required to become a member of their political elite.
Right. So on the one hand, this is a system that helps surface great men or great trends or whatever by eliminating classic world historical social barriers in the forms of sort of tribal control or class or institutional control, and that the great injustice of the United States was the systematic effort to deny 10 to 12% of the population the same lack of barrier, like to establish both formal barriers that denied them all rights and then create a system of laws that made them second-class citizens. That the incredible injustice of that was that the American promissory note wasn't only freedom, but it was also this, that, if you could make your mark on the world, the society wasn't organized to prevent you from doing that. That in fact, it sought to take advantage of people who had unique gifts and could change things for the better. And that is still part of the American ethos, that it is overwhelmingly now associated with the right and with the Republican Party by default, because the Democratic Party has embraced its opposite, which is you can't escape your skin color, you can't escape your history, you can't escape the system that has placed you and your family and whatever somewhere. There is no escape. So harness power to get yours, because everything is unequal and unjust. And they're both myths, kind of, maybe, because yes, people do have natural advantages and social advantages and, legacy admissions and all of that. And on the other hand, telling people that they have no power is a terrible myth. Everybody has power to be, also, as you would say, Christine, just to stay on your farm. Like, that's a choice you can make, to be a modest person that lives a modest life, because you don't want to, like, run in a marathon. You want to walk, and that's who you are. I actually want to finish with a recommendation that ties into this oddly. The best American novel I've read in several years. It's called Playworld by a writer named Adam Ross, and it's of particular meaning to me and to people like me because it's set on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and was, went off to college in 1978. So it's kind of a story about my life or the life of people in New York. And so I understand if I recommend this, you might pick it up and think, well, that has nothing to do with me if you're listening to me somewhere else. But it's a novel about the character of Generation Z and boomers and Generation Z, boomers and their children, and a world in which children were left entirely to their own devices, and in which adults believed that they could do, say, and act in any way around kids and teenagers with no consequences to the kids themselves, because they didn't really care what happened to even their own children. And
so a 70s childhood, yeah.
Yeah, total 70s childhood, and the benefits of that childhood, which were a certain kind of freedom, and the horrifying costs of that childhood in the act of kind of adult predation, both sexual, moral, spiritual, and the unbelievably immature behavior of adults as children are going on in life, trying to figure out how to be and do the right thing and make something of themselves, and having been entirely denied a way of doing that. So it's an American story. It's a very fascinating, thick, rich portrait of this country at a certain given time. Yes, a certain class, but also America itself, the Carter years, the early Reagan years. A brilliant, rich, thick, beautifully written, very digressive book that I can't recommend highly enough. So that's Playworld by Adam Ross.
It's also an oddly self-aware novel.
Are you
it's readable in large part because I find the narration is like assumes the audience knows, like, not knows information, but is not going to be shocked by what he says. It doesn't take an attitude like, let me reveal to you what all this, it has like a kind of, it has a self-aware narration, which is like, we both know what I'm saying is kind of crazy, and
right,
you're only going to believe parts of it because I'm a kid for parts of the narration, and, etc. And so it's accessible in that sense, I found.
Well, let's put it this way. Imagine that Catcher in the Rye were written by Holden Caulfield when he was 60. So it's a book about a 15-year-old, but it is written, the voice of the book, which is first person, is written from the perspective of an adult looking back. It's an autobiographical novel. Adam Ross was a child actor in New York, son of a not very successful actor and a ballet teacher mother, and that is the character that he plays. But it is him telling the story of this kid navigating the misbehaviors of the adults around him as an adult, and not, oh, you're all just phonies and all you're this and you're that. It's the rueful understanding that what he is describing, even though it's not a victim's book, he is describing a series of crimes that have been committed against this boy who happens to have been him. So it is distanced and has a moral framework that a Catcher in the Rye really can't have, since Salinger's genius in Catcher in the Rye was inhabiting the body, right, of the 15 or 16-year-old Holden Caulfield and making you see what he sees, even though, Salinger was 35 or something when he wrote it. So you have a perfect kind of mimetic understanding of the brain of an adolescent kid in crisis. This is a story about the world in which this boy, Griffin Hurt, swims, and how toxic it is, and how the people whose toxicity didn't even know how toxic they were being. Anyway, I'm thrilled you read it, Seth. Anyway, as I say, it's just a remarkable achievement. Playworld by Adam Ross. So we got two of us recommending it, and if you download it, and read it this weekend, email, or if you read it all, email us at podcast@commentary.org and see if you agree. And we'll be back on Monday. So for Abe, Seth, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.